What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communism.
ODDTV. Take a journey with me deep inside the rabbit hole. Wake up, my friends, there's some things that you have to know. Everything you ever thought you knew, it has to go. For instance, NASA is the world's largest magic show. 9/11 was a planned demolition and Sandy Hook was a scam. Come on, man, are you tripping? Constant programming being crammed in your vision. Just take a step back and examine this prison. Turn on the news and they're trying to blind you. All they ever do is tell you lies and divide you. There's nowhere you can even hide, they'll find you. Illuminati all-seeing eye right behind you. It's about time you find out we're being lied to. They're attempting to control the mind that's inside you. Hide you from the power that designed you. Does anybody have a problem with this? Well, I do. I want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They say they got it.
The more humanity strays from its origin, the more we deny our bond with nature, the farther from perfection we become. We are the only creatures on the planet that use symbols in reference to something else. We use symbols for absolutely everything the mind can conceive of. There is at least one word or icon or gesture to insinuate everything our five senses can detect and then some. But along with this beautiful gift comes a flaw. Most people are unwilling to seek and create their own interpretations of these symbols. Instead, they blindly submit to preconceived definitions and connotations given by sources unknown. Because of this, many things have been predetermined in our understanding of life without our knowledge. Words can be perverted and used to manipulate rather than to inform. Symbols can be used to segregate rather than unite. And those given the responsibility and authority to disseminate information to the public possess the ability to do with it what they choose. Listen carefully. In the prediction that humanity will lose the awareness of their true bond with nature by means of external possessions, this is where ego and domination became the predominant ambition of the civilized world. Not surprisingly, this time frame was precisely when the worldwide coordination of Pope Gregory XIII forced the 12-month calendar as well as the first mechanical clock onto indigenous peoples. This is what's known as the error in time. Before the inception of the two instruments by the Roman Catholic Church, each year was divided into 13 moon cycles with 28 days each. But the most detrimental part of these two instruments is the insinuation that time was something external, something inorganic and outside the body that we must watch and obey. The 7th century Mayan prophet Picalvatan left a powerful message for future generations of evolution. If humanity wishes to save itself from biospheric destruction, it must return to living in natural time. He also foretold of our accelerated technological society and of the damage of our collective divergence from natural law in exchange for material values. Astrology and the studies of the heavens are as old as civilization. Throughout the past several thousand years, new religions have all but replaced the pagan religions of prior years. Man has been so thoroughly fascinated with these objects in the sky that they formed constellations from them and applied stories to them. In Greek mythology, these were personified as the gods. We notice in the structures that still stand to this day that the most ancient of civilizations put forth more wealth, power, time, and effort into the locations of the stars than any other practice. This is commonly written off as simple curiosity. It is a common misconception that the pagan religion is rarely practiced today. In fact, paganism in its evolution is the most widely practiced form of religion. You may ask yourself how this is possible. The answer is hidden in nearly all of our current popular religions. But who would have the power and the desire to integrate a seemingly long-gone religion into such popular opposite denominations? Dr. Adam Weishaupt was born on February 6, 1748, in Ingolstadt, in a city in Bayern, or Bavaria, Germany. This interesting character was the son of a rabbi and converted to Catholicism after his father's death. After studying French philosophers such as Voltaire, he supposedly learned the teachings of Satanism in the French royal court. World-famous central banker Mayer Amschel Rothschild of the Rothschild dynasty chose Weishaupt to create the Coven of Golden Dawn, which to this day is Rothschild's private coven. Amschel Rothschild, for those who are unaware, instigated the American Revolution, America's supposed liberation from Britain. Rothschild instructed Weishaupt to create the Ancient Illuminated Seers of Bavaria. This is better known as the Order of the Illuminati. The name in Luciferian teachings means the bearer of the light, the illuminated, or the enlightened one. The Areopagite, or tribunal, was the inner circle of the Supreme Order, and were the only ones privy to secret meetings. In Nesta Webster's book, The World Revolution, she states, "The art of Illuminism lay in enlisting dupes as well as adepts, and by encouraging dreams of honest visionaries, or the schemes of fanatics, by flattering the vanity of ambitious egotists, by working on unbalanced brains, or by playing such passions as greed and power to make men of totally divergent aims serve the secret purpose of the sect. People with money were welcomed but kept oblivious to actual secrets. The purpose is to win power and riches, to undermine secular or religious government, and obtain the masters of the world." The goal of the order was and still is to one day deliver the human race from all religion. Progression through the political and religious hierarchy was obtained by blackmail in the form of bribing people in power with sex from local prostitutes. In the 16th and 17th century, high-ranking officials in political or religious organizations were liable to be sentenced to death for such acts. In 1780, Baron Franz Friedrich Knigge was recruited. He was the most instrumental person in the marriage of the Masons and the Illuminati. This allowed the Illuminati to expand rapidly with the use of Masonic lodges. On August 29, 1781, Congress of Wilhelmsbad declared the alliance official. Those in attendance were put under oath, never to reveal what took place in that meeting. Comte de Virieu, a Mason from Martinez de Lodge at Lyons, was questioned about the meeting upon his arrival home. He stated, "I can only tell you that all this is much more serious than you think. The conspiracy which is being woven is so well thought out that it will be, so to speak, impossible for the monarchy and the church to escape it." He later denounced the Illuminati. Sir John Dee. John Dee was a servant to Queen Elizabeth Tudor of the Tudor dynasty. John Dee was the head of the British Secret Service, the MI5. He was also known for the practice of black magic and his affiliation with the occult. If this is your first time hearing about the occult, or are unaware of its dominance in the world to this day, pay close attention. Pagan symbols, gods, rituals, and doctrines are the basis for most every religion practiced throughout the world. On January 22, 1783, Congress ratified a contract stating that all bills of credit emitted, monies borrowed, and debts contracted by or under the authority of Congress before the assembling of the United States in pursuance of the present Confederation shall be deemed and considered a charge against the United States for payment and satisfaction whereof the United States and the public faith are hereby solemnly pledged. The party that the U.S. owed these loans to? King George. I hope this paints a picture for you of how Great Britain funded both sides of the Revolution. To this day, Great Britain collects taxes from the United States via the IRS. The IRS isn't even an agency of the United States government. If you don't believe me, look up IRS publication 6209. The FCC, CIA, FBI, and NASA were never part of the United States government. The U.S. government only holds shares of the stock in various agencies. Social Security numbers are also issued by the UN through the IMF. The Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865, was also instigated by Amschel Rothschild to divide the United States and force it into debt with a central bank. The goal was to put the country of the U.S. back into the hands of Britain through huge loans taken out for munitions. To do this, it was crucial to put a controversial issue in limbo such as slavery. Knowing full well that the Declaration of Independence would create an uproar among southern states that depended heavily upon slave labor, it was signed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania by 35 people, 33 of whom were Freemasons. John Brown was a Mason and a Rosicrucian who was brought to power by William Lloyd Garrison and Senator Charles Sumner, both descendants of the Illuminati bloodline. With the help of the New York Times, John Brown was built up to be a hero in the anti-slavery movement. Ulysses S. Grant, former president, was born Hiram S. Grant. This name was given to him by his father, Master Mason Jesse Root Grant. Jesse Root Grant worked for John Brown's father and then went on to work for E.A. Collins, one of the 13 Illuminati bloodlines. Ulysses S. Grant was brought to power rapidly with help from Collins. From April 1861 to May 1864, Grant went from the rank of private to commander-in-chief of the entire Union Army. Once Grant was appointed president, his cabinet consisted of 8 Freemasons, including Alphonso Taft, which was William Taft's father, who was also an ancestor of Bill Clinton. Jonas Mills Bundy was one of the 13 Illuminati bloodlines, who was also the presidential advisor to Grant as well as the next 2 presidents. And cabinet member Columbus Delano was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandfather. In November 21, 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt wrote, "The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson." Abraham Lincoln's father was A.A. Springs, who was part of the Rothschild dynasty. Lincoln's half-brother worked for Louis Cass Pasteur in the Merovingian dynasty, which was the 13th Illuminati bloodline. Pasteur also owned Jekyll Island, which was where the Federal Reserve Bank was created. In the mid-1800s, Abraham Lincoln and the Whigs were trying desperately to keep Andrew Jackson from establishing a gold standard called the Independent Treasury System. Lincoln and his party fought to set up a central bank, making such public speeches as, "Under a gold and silver standard, all will suffer more or less, and very many will lose everything that renders life desirable." This statement resounds elements of scare tactics in this speech and other speeches on the matter given by Abraham Lincoln. They give no real evidence or explanation. In the early 1900s, after a failed attempt for Woodrow Wilson to set up what was called the League of Nations following World War I, Wilson and his advisor, Colonel House, set up the Institute of International Affairs. This institute had 2 branches, one set up in England called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the Council on Foreign Relations was incorporated as the American branch in New York on July 29, 1921. Founding members include Colonel House, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and a few others. A national income tax was declared unconstitutional in 1895 by the Supreme Court, but a constitutional amendment was proposed in Congress by Senator Nelson Aldrich. This makes much more sense when you notice that Nelson Aldrich was also known as being the authentic voice of J.P. Morgan, and later married into the Rockefeller family. Today, 27 to 35% of American workers' pay is taxed, and this money goes to a central bank called the Federal Reserve, or the Fed. For those of you who are unaware of the Federal Reserve Bank and what it is capable of, it is a non-government-owned bank that provides the U.S. with all of its currency. They control the inflation rate by the amount of money in circulation. Yet the most amazing aspect of the central bank is the suspension of specie payments, in which the Fed can refuse to pay their obligations, yet taxpayers must pay their debts or go bankrupt. In other words, the suspension of specie payments is the central bank's right to breach a contract with no penalty whatsoever. In even simpler terms, it's called theft. How is it that the Fed is allowed to breach any contract they wish without penalty from the government? The answer is simple. The Federal Reserve Bank has power over the government instead of under it. Carroll Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor while at Georgetown University, wrote of central banks, "They want nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole, controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world acting in concert, by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences." It is important to note that nearly all of the founders of the Federal Reserve Bank were involved in the conception of the Council on Foreign Relations. Since 1934, when the Fed was established, almost every United States Secretary of State, all Secretaries of War or Defense since Henry L. Stimson, almost every head of CIA since Allen Dulles, nearly all presidential candidates, Dwight D. Eisenhower, JFK, Richard Nixon, and Bill Clinton were members of the CFR. George Bush Sr. was actually the CFR director from 1977 to 1979. Understand that all of these high-ranking government positions were lobbied into place by the organizations set up by the international banking cartel. There are secret meetings held everywhere by many of the same members in the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the Club of Rome, the United Nations, and the two branches of the Institute of International Affairs. These groups make up what is known as the Round Table, developed by Cecil Rhodes. Other offshoots or preliminary groups are the Bohemian Group and Yale University's Skull and Bones organization, which we all know George W. Bush, George Bush Sr., and John Kerry were all a part of. Most every meeting by these groups are attended by the most powerful government officials, corporate leaders, media moguls, and royal families in the world. These meetings are held in secret and not a word of them reaches the mainstream media. How is it that so many powerful people can attend meetings alongside the mainstream media and not a mention of it makes it to the public? This all may start making more sense when you start understanding that common citizens aren't meant to know what is happening at the top. Is there any dispute that to gain power in our day and age, it takes strategy and intelligence rather than brute force? Logic will tell you that in any sport or game, to claim victory, you must keep your moves strategic and secret. Why would it be any different in global politics?
If I bring up chess master up here and ask him, what are the principles, Wojciech, and become a master of the game of chess, he'll say these four things. He'll say that you need a sense of patience. Now, if you don't have patience, don't even try to begin the game to learn it. He'll say you need a sense of timing. If you don't have a sense of timing, don't open the book. You have to have knowledge of your opponent, right? And then the fourth one that they'll tell you is that you need to have the willingness to make any and all sacrifices. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why are the dark side winning the game? It's because they've got infinite patience. They've been working on one thing for 50,000 years. I call that patience. They got a brilliant sense of timing because they know all about the astrology and the divination that we forgot, that our agricultural ancestors all knew about. Well, we're with the Julian calendar and we're not interested in any of that stuff anymore. We're slaves of the watch, but we don't know about the higher time to rule our own lives by. They have amazing knowledge of you, right? They have intense knowledge of us, their enemies. And the fourth one is the clincher, isn't it? Because they're willing to make any and all sacrifices when and wherever they need to do it.
George W. Bush is a direct descendant of Godfrey de Bouillon. The Bouillons were servants of Pope Gregory VII and led the European noblemen into the crusade in order to recapture Jerusalem from the Islamic faith. He became the first king of Jerusalem and Duke of Lower Lorraine, which was known as a major region for the bloodline linked to the Illuminati. Bush is closely related to every European monarch. He is the 13th cousin of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles. He also has kinship with every member of the British royal family, the House of Windsor. The House of Windsor is known for abandoning their German names after World War I due to criticism of the people. A lesser-known fact about the House of Windsor, however, is the heavy funding contribution to bring Adolf Hitler to power in the rise of World War II. The swastika is actually a symbol of the sun, referencing to the sun order of the occult. The word Nazi is actually Nazi, one of the Anunnaki children of Mother Goddess Ninharsag in the Sumerian texts. And even the word Holocaust is actually Yiddish for burn, sacrifice, offering. Heinrich Himmler was the commander of the SS and one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. Himmler was a seventh-ray occultist and was very influenced by the book Astara by George Luns, who was an Austrian mystic. This occult book mapped out the plan for a cleansing of ethnicities and bringing about one race, and to revive the ancient tradition of the Knights Templar of the Middle Ages. The Knights Templar were a group largely killed off by the French monarchy. The remaining Templar created many Masonic orders and secret societies throughout Europe, from which the Illuminati is believed to have originated. It's important to note as well that the Bush family's ancestor, Godfrey de Bouillon, was a Holy Templar himself. To this day, every single United States president, with no exception, has a direct bloodline relation to British monarchs. And on December 20th, 1993, George Herbert Walker Bush was knighted by the Queen of England as a Knight Grand Cross of the Most Honorable Order of the Bath for his leadership in the Gulf War. Does it strike you as odd that our president, our leader, kneeled before the Queen of England in a ceremony that symbolizes allegiance? All of this is part of an ultimate goal of the mystery religions. The mystery religion is the paganism we've been talking about all along, but the pagan religions known to the public today are nowhere near as involved as the mystery religion. It is much less confusing than you think. Try to imagine this practice as less of a religion and more of an ambition. The ambition is to reach enlightenment. There is no superhuman intelligence or fantasy involved in this. The gifts of God are very simple. Omnipresence. The power of one being or consciousness to be everywhere at once. Omniscience. The power of knowing everything that can be known. And omnipotence. To have unlimited power. We see all of this today. It cannot be denied. If you still don't believe that the mystery religion is present today, just look around you. There are literally thousands of statues and emblems of ancient religions on every political establishment. Even on military uniforms, these symbols are found everywhere, but not only in our country. The same emblems are found on every nation's military uniform. And why would this be? Because a life taken at a chosen time, place, and a specific manner, it becomes a sacrifice. And to further illustrate this point, on March 20th, 2003, President Bush launched a bombing of Baghdad at 5:50 Baghdad time. This lasted into March 21st, but according to the mystery religion, this date is known as the Eve of Ostara, more commonly known as the spring or vernal equinox. Occultists worship the goddess of the earth, Gaia, on this day. The Druids knew this date as the spring fertility rite, the day of feast. The war was promptly ended on May 1st, 2003. This date is known in the Druidic calendar as Beltane, or Walpurgis Night. It was named after Saint Walpurga, who was the pagan goddess of fertility. From March 20th to May 1st, the pagan ritual is to give blood to the earth and renew life to the goddess of fertility. What better time frame to declare a bloody war on the days of a ritual sacrifice and end it exactly when the pagan ritual ends? The parallels are uncanny. These are all facts written in many different sources around the world and are available to anyone to discover.
Now you know why they're out to destroy you. Today there is so much confusion about what Christianity is, because everything I thought that was Christianity, I found out wasn't. If this continues, there will be an overthrow of all things. Yea, this change and overthrow is deliberately planned. There is nothing going on today in the United States of America by accident. Nothing. There is nothing going on in the Catholic Church today that's happening by accident.
They were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. If you understand esoteric writing, what you do is you try to confuse so the common people like you will not understand what's said. So you take an idea and you put it at the beginning and the end of the sentence, and then you intersperse all sorts of things in the middle to confuse common people like you. And it all goes back to these ancient times and tapping into the mystery religions. The occult is in total working control of America today, and that is why we're at war in the Middle East. What is it all about? It is part of the continuing world revolution. It is part of the move to bring about World War III and ultimately then the one world order and the new world religion.
This information is backed up by scholars, teachers, philosophers, doctors, and professionals in every respective field, all around the world. The reasons why the majority of people don't know about this is because over 80% of the population gets their world news strictly from the mainstream media. And if you trace every major media station's chain of command to the top, you will find the same people who own the corporations that lobby every high-ranking political official into place. And for those of you who are unaware of this one world government and one world religion, I challenge you to do an internet search on the New World Order. You will be overwhelmed by the amount of people trying to get the word out to the masses. This exemplifies the findings that 87% of the population formulates their belief structure according to other people's ideas. Only 13% formulate their beliefs on logic and evaluation. Groupthink. It is a term to describe a group unwilling to look beyond the overall consensus of the herd. Many times it is out of a lack of drive or ambition to ask original questions to arrive at genuine answers. But more importantly and dangerously, it is also an occurrence that spawns from the fear of looking foolish in front of peers. Both religion and politics are forms of groupthink. Words such as patriotism and faith are both fancy words that ultimately mean blind submission. Supposedly, it is considered heresy or unpatriotic to question the words of your leader. So the fear of upsetting the superior higher power has forced the herd to practice groupthink regardless of what it leads to. And one of the greatest examples of groupthink is the stigma given to conspiracy theories. The phrase conspiracy theory gives a distinct impression to the average person. The JFK assassination, Area 51, Roswell, government cover-ups, strange disappearances. These subjects probably sound a bit too fantasy for the average person, and it's quite understandable. They're supposed to sound made up. Throughout the mistranslation of time and embellishment of these stories, facts were added or omitted. Some may be true and some may be false, but one thing is for sure. If a global secret needed to remain hidden yet began emerging among the public, the best cover-up is to embellish or alter the story until it sounds ludicrous. So what happens when the secret involves the government and the government has intimate ties to the mainstream media, and the mainstream media, as said before, has been proven to sway at least 80% of the public's opinion? The logic is undeniable. Media in every form is put in place to make people feel stupid for even keeping an open mind towards conspiracy theories. Movies, books, fairy tales, and folklore are all tools to make the average person feel insane for supporting or believing in a conspiracy. And why shouldn't they? Our leaders have no problems telling us not to investigate or believe in these theories.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
The most basic of pagan practices is the control of human population to have a perfect balance between man and nature. The goal is to bring the population down to 500 million, which is over a 90% reduction in humanity. Open your eyes today as if you've never seen the world before, and you will begin to notice that the goal of population reduction is everywhere around us.
Let me assure you that absolutely nothing that I'm going to tell you is exaggerated, is interpolated, or is imagined. Everything I'm going to tell you is documented. He who controls food controls the world. Well, they said in 1962, we're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Under Codex, every dairy cow on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Furthermore, under Codex, every animal used for food on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormones. If you do the numbers in the WHO-FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big, billion deaths.
The UN has put out dozens of public documents where they're calling for an 80% world population reduction. In fact, at the Beijing Women's Conference, the World Conference, back in 1997, the head of the UN Food Program said, "We will use food as a weapon against the people."
66% of United States residents' public water is fluoridated. It is known to have tremendous effects on bone cancer, joint problems, bone weakness, lowered estrogen and testosterone levels, and dental fluorosis, which is yellowing of the teeth and pitting in the enamel. Wouldn't it make more sense to enhance public water with vitamins which are meant to be ingested to promote overall health, rather than putting such a toxic chemical in our water with a bogus explanation that it will improve our dental health? Something doesn't seem right about this. Do you honestly believe that these companies care deeply enough for the people to spend large amounts of their own money to fluoridate public water when the people already purchase their own toothpaste? But there's a difference between toothpaste and drinking water. We don't ingest toothpaste. If you go to any hardware store and look at any rat poison product, you will only find one ingredient: sodium fluoride. It is the most toxic ionic molecule outside of potassium dichromate. Now Dannon, along with other companies, have begun fluoridating bottled water. It is becoming increasingly difficult to get away from. And the fact that fluoride is also used in many prescription antidepressants shows that it eliminates aggression and motivation in people.
Fluoride, to my knowledge as a physician, has absolutely no biological benefit whatsoever.
But one of the significant things is that the Russians carried out all sorts of experiments on the people living in the Gulag. One of them, of course, was to fluoridate the water. Why? You fluoridate the water, why people are not as aggressive as they ordinarily would be. In fact, what is the active ingredient in Prozac that is so widely distributed in America today? Why, it's a fluoride compound.
And now we are finding that public water nationwide is showing up with arsenic, lead, cadmium, and thermonium, which is a radioactive form of lead. Cancer, lowered sex drive, birth defects, sedation, and brain defects. Does this not sound like a wonder drug for anyone aiming to control a population?
People have an unconscious trust in their doctor or their dentist, and if you can persuade doctors and dentists that fluoride is safe and good, then you're able to reach the rest of the nation. People believe their doctors and dentists, and that was a way of promoting fluoride for Bernays. Fluoride was killing their cattle, destroying their crops. Fluoride given to rats had produced bone cancer and liver cancer, and that those results had been doctored to make it look as though fluoride hadn't caused as much cancer.
The pattern that we saw, it typically is what we see with other neurotoxic agents that are well known to cause a hypoactivity or a memory problem or an IQ problem. When I first presented the results of these studies, one of the individuals sitting and listening to the results, he says, "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" And he says, "You're telling us that we're reducing the IQ of children." And basically I said, yes.
You see, the plan behind sustainable development includes population control. It's a program for land use control, education control, and population control. The leaders of the sustainable movement say that the world's human population should not exceed 500 million people. That's a 93% reduction. of today's population levels. In 1992, while the Rio conference was going on, George Bush, then president, was there. He was just offshore in Prince Charles's yacht, where he executed the Agenda 21 protocols on behalf of the United States and brought it back to Washington, D.C. Within a year, Bill Clinton, by executive order, established the President's Council for Sustainable Development.
In 1996, Bill Clinton set up the President's Council on Sustainable Development. One of the dictates of Agenda 21 is that every country in the world is to set up a national council to oversee the implementation of Agenda 21.
The question is then, how do they do it? How in the world are they getting this agenda from the international level down to the local level? Well, they've got a plan for that too. Now, on the environmental side, there's probably a number of different plans, but from the environmental side, you have an organization called the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Been in existence since the United Nations was created. It's not part of the United Nations Charter. It's a scientific advisor to the United Nations. But through the IUCN, such programs as ecosystem management, American Heritage Rivers, the Clean Water Initiative, the Endangered Species Act, and all the rules and regulations of the EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Park Service, and so forth. In a biocentric approach, says the IUCN, the rights of nature are defended first and foremost on the grounds of the intrinsic value of animals, plants, rivers, mountains, and ecosystems, rather than simply on the basis of the utilitarian value or benefit to human beings. In other words, nature comes first. Nature's needs comes before man's needs. In a religious context, it's called pantheism, the belief that nature is God. It goes on to say, even worse, people are then members of a community of beings, like human beings, living and non-living. So a rock is now elevated up to the status of a human being, and they are both equal in the eyes of this belief system. In contrast, they go on to say a reasonable estimate for an industrialized world society at the present North American material standard of living would be 1 billion people. So if we wanted to maintain our current standard of living, we would have to reduce the Earth's human population by somewhere around 70%. In 1970, just 3 years after the publication of the Iron Mountain Report, which calls for, if we're going to create a world government, we can no longer use war as a mechanism to cause fear amongst populations and therefore allow us to control the behavior of populations through fear. And they settled on, in 1967, in their publication called the Iron Mountain Report, the environmental holocaust. In 1970, 3 years after that publication, Foreign Relations began to publish a series of articles describing the ecological holocaust that was facing the world. And in this particular issue, the first issue done by George Kennan to prevent a world disaster, where it sums up in 3 points that the eco-crisis is a global threat so great that it endangers all of life on Earth.
Those who deny global warming are just flat out wrong.
Ellen Goodman from the Boston Globe wrote, "Let's just say that global warming deniers are now on par with Holocaust deniers." Scientists silenced for questioning the threat of global warming.
I know that I've had several friends who have essentially been told that if you speak out on climate change, you must do so as an independent citizen. If you do so through our organization or through our institution, you will essentially be fired.
Aurelia Pecci, who actually created the Club of Rome, and it's the inner circle of the global elitists, in 1991 stated that while searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, and the like would fit the bill. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy then is humanity itself.
To put this to you bluntly, global warming is a complete fallacy. Al Gore received the Grammy and the Nobel Peace Prize for a film that is filled with holes and mistruths.
Ice cores taken 2,000 meters below the surface have enabled us to look at the last 160,000 years.
We believe that in Greenland, the medieval warm period was about 1.5 degrees warmer on average than today.
and they also show consistently warmer temperatures thousands of years ago before man-made greenhouse gases existed.
Approach our time, we can see that in the period between 4,000 years ago and back to the period 2,000 years ago, which is actually the Roman age, the temperatures have been decreasing in Greenland by 2.5 degrees.
Al Gore is made out to be a revolutionary figure attempting to save the planet, which is quite true. He just doesn't mention the fact that saving the Earth doesn't involve you. According to his agenda, it will result in massive land repossession and extreme limitations on food and water and fossil fuels for the public. And please note that Al Gore is a sustainable developer. The global warming lie is very popular today because it receives major media coverage and has an attractively titled goal of saving the planet. But how does this tie in with Agenda 21? The result of the 1992 Earth Summit Conference in Rio de Janeiro was the Kyoto Treaty. The Kyoto Treaty states that every country must drastically reduce the use of fossil fuels by mandate of the United Nations.
Concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are at their highest levels in more than 200,000 years. If the trend does not change, scientists expect the seas to rise 2 feet or more over the next century. Thank you very much.
And as of June 2007, 172 nations and other government entities have ratified the treaty.
How are they going to get you to join the new economy? They're going to say we have a solution. You see, one of the tricks of the Illuminati is they create a problem and then they provide the solution when you beg them to.
And pray tell, what will the United Nations suggest when there's a global problem? They will demand a global government, a new world order. Why do you think the UN is consistently trying to disarm the public and the nations? They don't want us to be capable of fighting back. The proof of this is in the film released by the UN called Armed to the Teeth, where it demonizes gun ownership. It is also shown in the freedom from war policy put in place by JFK in 1961.
President John Kennedy went to the United Nations September 1961, and he presented the United States program for general and complete disarmament in a peaceful world during a speech, and he said, this is the official program of the United States of America. It's a disarmament program. It calls for the United States to turn over its military to the United Nations. Now, let that sit for a second. It calls for the United States to turn over its military to the United Nations. The program ends by saying progressive controlled disarmament would proceed to a point where no state would have the military power to challenge the progressively strengthened UN peace force. The UN would have all military power.
There is no other way to read this publication. It clearly states that all nations will hand over their military forces to a global United Nations military. Now with electronic banking, wire transfers, and credit cards, people have less physical custody of their money. As of right now, the amount of money in circulation is not able to cover the national debt. This was carefully planned since the inception of the Federal Reserve Bank. William Cooper, a loving father and husband, friend of many, simply a teacher trying to better humanity and protect fellow citizens across the globe.
They became a mystery to the others, and the priesthood was born. No king ever existed without the permission of the priesthood. The kings never had the power and don't to this day. Kings exist at the whim of the real power, which is the priesthood standing behind the throne.
It is a method of encoding information through a system of mathematics and numbers. It is some of the most ancient knowledge that man has ever possessed and has been kept secret and given only to those who have proven themselves worthy through the process of initiation.
Supposedly, a CNN reporter found Osama bin Laden, took a television camera crew with him, went into Osama bin Laden's hideout, interviewed him and his top leadership, and he came out and told everybody, within 3 weeks, Osama bin Laden is going to attack the United States and Israel. Now, don't you think that's kind of strange, folks? You see, because the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, with the biggest budget in the history of the world, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years, and can't find him. Some doofus jerk-off reporter with a camera crew waltzes right into his hideout and interviews him. And I'm telling you, be prepared for a major attack. But it won't be Osama bin Laden. It will be those behind the New World Order. I wonder what Osama bin Laden's targets are supposed to be. And if they don't, if this doesn't materialize in the next 2 or 3 weeks, it will eventually materialize because they haven't succeeded in getting the guns out of the hands of the American people, nor have they succeeded in taking our freedoms away. And so I can tell you with a certainty, they must do something terrible in order to stop this backlash and regain the sympathy of the mass herds of sheeple out there.
What is our common bond truly? Freedom! Freedom! Without freedom, you can't be a Christian no matter what denomination you belong to. You can't be a Buddhist. You can't own a donut shop. You can't drive from here to Oregon. You can't be an American because that's what it's all about, and it's the only thing that it's all about. Nothing else. Nothing else. You don't really understand sometimes what a terrible burden it is to know some of the things that I know and try to wake people up and impart this knowledge to them and find out that they just have walls built in front of them. They want to be slaves. That's why my broadcast scares the hell out of socialists. You see, what happens when you broadcast the truth is you piss everybody off.
We have very powerful tools on our side, called the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. These documents state that no government can deprive us of our natural rights. So how is it happening? You must understand that the elite group controlling our government, our educational system, agriculture, and media are also in control of our free enterprise. Your absolute rights as natural persons are the right to life, security, and property. And all of these are very important. Remember that you can never be deprived of these simple rights unless you are willingly waiving them. But you need to understand your rights if you want to be protected under them. The true history of this planet has been stifled from the top down. Since the inception of monotheism and the ridicule as well as outlaw in specific cultures of all pagan religions and practices, a lie has been forced upon all civilizations. You have to wonder why powerful empires were threatened enough by paganism to make the practice of such religions punishable by death. This threat didn't end during the Roman Empire. Take a look at how the founders of America, by mandate of Great Britain, wiped out Native American tribes indiscriminately. Great Britain has also shown some of the most brutal forms of genocide in Africa, India, New Zealand, New Guinea, and many other locations in which pagan tribes still existed. East Timor suffered from one of the most brutal genocides in all of history and was fueled by the United Nations and the United States funding during the Carter administration.
Ford and Kissinger visited Jakarta, I think it was December 5th. We know that they had requested that Indonesia delay the invasion until after they left because it would be too embarrassing. And within hours, I think, after they left, the invasion took place on December 7th.
What happened on December 7th in 1975 is just one of the great evil deeds of history. Early in the morning, bombs began dropping on Dili. The number of troops that invaded Dili that day almost outnumbered the entire population of the town. And for 2 or 3 weeks, they just killed people. So the Timorese were fleeing into the jungles by the thousands. By late 1977-78, Indonesia set up receiving centers for those Timorese who came out of the jungle waving white flags. Those the Indonesians thought were more educated or who were suspected of belonging to Frelimo or other opposition parties were immediately killed. They took women aside and flew them off to Dili in helicopters for use by the Indonesian soldiers. They killed children and babies. But in those days, their main strategy and their main weapon was starvation.
By 1978, it was approaching really genocidal levels. The church and other sources estimated about 200,000 people killed. The U.S. backed it all the way. The U.S. provided 90% of the arms. Right after the invasion, arms shipments were stepped up. When the Indonesians actually began to run out of arms in 1978, the Carter administration moved in and increased arms sales. And other Western countries did the same. Canada, England, Holland, and everybody who could make a buck was in there trying to make sure they could kill more Timorese.
It is important to note that followers of monotheistic religions are not to blame, just as not all members of Freemasonry, intelligence agencies, fraternal orders, or political organizations are part of the esoteric agenda that is being carried out in all upper echelons of society. Understand that most all of these problems are not by mistake, but by design. Most people do not understand how colors, shapes, catchwords and phrases, and biological timings are all used as talismans to affect humanity on an emotional and spiritual level. Colors are used hypnotically in every news channel and corporate advertisement. Fast food chains typically use vibrant reds, yellows, and whites in their restaurants to cause the customers to feel hurried and restless. This helps the customers filter in and out quicker to make for more customers. Fine dining restaurants, on the other hand, use very earthy, natural colors such as soft greens, blues, and browns to calm the senses and to make for a more lengthy and peaceful meal. And the same goes for the music that is played at these establishments. Specific musical notations and progressions can give relaxing or exciting stimuli to the body without our knowledge. The music industry goes even further and uses natural rhythms of the heart to map out the tempo of pop songs. This is why 72 beats per minute is used very frequently in pop music. Music is not a product of culture. In 1986, the National Academy of Science found that infants prefer consonant sounds such as perfect fifths rather than dissonant ones. This is just a small example of our natural ability to understand sound. So be very careful when placing a child in front of a TV or near a stereo. Those who believe that children cannot comprehend violence on a TV screen or aggression from music are thinking strictly with the left brain. The child may not rationally understand the words or actions on the screen, but the right brain, even in infants, can absolutely understand everything in its immediate environment because it transmits a frequency that can affect us on a subatomic level. Science has even proven that proper sonic vibrations are essential for the health of our vegetation. Studies done on many ecosystems have shown that when a specific species becomes extinct or moves from an area, another species will replace its song patterns to fit the overall harmony of the vibrations required for plant life to thrive. All these are known as talismans and are used very carefully by corporations and the media. Catchphrases are also used to spark certain emotions in the psyche. When the average person hears the words terror, bombing, gunshots, murder, war, assassination, and so on, the body and the mind respond with heightened alertness and caution. The tragic event involving the Branch Davidians at Waco and the Oklahoma City bombings claimed the lives of men, women, and children as they ended in flames on April 19th. This date is a pagan holiday where human sacrifice is made by fire. The tragic events of September 11th, 2001 happened on the Mayan calendar date of 6 epochs, which represents large-scale change. So these unfortunate events are not by chance. One needs only to look at the result of the major political decisions of the United States since the inception of the United Nations to catch a glimpse of the ultimate goal. Every major war, assassination, terrorist attack, or security weakness exposed has two specific common themes. 1. The unfortunate event makes worldwide news and scares or angers the public. And 2. The result, no matter what, is always the expansion of government and the destruction of constitutional freedoms. It doesn't matter what the excuse or the explanation is. The result always tells the truth. A child can give the greatest excuses every time he's too sick for school, but if it always happens on the day of a test, the truth is revealed by the result. The major media outlets can give every explanation in the book as to why war is declared, assassinations happen, and terrorist events take place, but if they all end up in the expansion of government and the destruction of constitutional freedoms, the truth is revealed by the result.
Was a statement reportedly made by Attorney General Janet Reno during an interview on 60 Minutes. She allegedly defined a cultist as one who has a strong belief in the Bible and the second coming of Christ, who frequently attends Bible studies, who has a high level of financial giving to a Christian cause, who homeschools their children, who has accumulated survival foods, and has a strong belief in the Second Amendment, and who distrusts government.
Still another problem, according to these groups, is the executive branch making a grab for much more police power, some of it highly questionable in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing.
It shouldn't be the case that Americans have to worry that their phone could be tapped. It shouldn't be the case that Americans have to worry that their credit records could be made accessible by the FBI without them being involved in any criminal activity.
The first draft of the House anti-terrorism bill was so loose it could let authorities define as an act of terrorism, prosecutable by the federal government, everything from threatening your spouse with a gun to blocking an abortion clinic. While the anti-terrorism bills ask for sweeping new powers, the ACLU and others also worry about numerous executive orders that the public knows little about. These orders could give the president, federal agencies, and the military near dictatorial powers.
In November 1997, former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark headed a delegation of the International Action Center on his 7th trip to Iraq to investigate the continued effects of the United Nations sanctions on the population. We were shocked by what we saw, an almost total absence of medicines, medical supplies, and spare parts for the equipment. Despite the heroic efforts of medical personnel, babies, children, and the chronically ill continued to die in vast numbers. The United States government claims that Saddam Hussein is to blame for the crisis. What is the real cause of the suffering? The sanctions. They are an extension of the 1991 United States war against Iraq. The goal was to cripple Iraq's infrastructure and make civilian life unsustainable.
We demonstrated the capacity of technology to cripple a country without ever setting foot on it in the Persian Gulf. It's important to recognize that because it goes hand in hand with the sanctions. When we merely say that we flew 110,000 aerial sorties in 42 days, one every 30 seconds on the average, 24 hours a day, we ignore what we really did.
Officials said the death toll was now 288, with many more to come. The trucks kept filling up and driving away, past waiting relatives who knew they might never be able to identify the bodies of their loved ones. The community of Almeria filled one of the first of many funerals with gunfire in sign of grief and fury, and with angry words aimed through foreign journalists. "My mother, she's gone," shouted this young man. This woman asked, "Could not all your modern technology tell you that there were children and women here?" Bill Blakemore, ABC News, in the Almeria district of Baghdad.
We destroyed every silo for grain or anything else storing food in the whole country. We destroyed all the storage and processing of food plants throughout the country. Even dates, the world's biggest exporter of dates. Famous processing and packaging plants in Baghdad, deliberately destroyed. We didn't want them to be able to feed themselves for a long, long time. We destroyed that. cut off all the milk. The malnutrition of the mothers immediately jeopardized all of the infants.
Iraq's water purification plants were heavily bombed in the war, and many that were repaired have broken down. The United Nations bans the import of spare parts and chlorine into Iraq to purify water.
The daily life we perceive with our five senses is not reality. Quantum physics has shown that space and time are illusions of perception. Therefore, our bodies cannot truly be a reality if they occupy this space. The blank matter within the most basic building blocks of perceivable existence is malleable and molded by intent. This means that consciousness shapes our reality. This seems difficult to accept for most, and it is quite understandable. In modern times, we are taught from an early age how to think rationally and tangibly. This is a very left-brain method of education, and it has more harmful effects than is given credit for. The left brain deals with logic, details, facts, patterns, practicality, science, and math, as the right brain deals with feeling, intuition, symbols, images, risk-taking, philosophy, and religion. With a deliberate push for government-controlled educational curriculums, generation after generation of the youth are being taught to focus only on the facts, figures, and numbers. Repetition is used to train children subconsciously to accept what they're learning. Children aren't rewarded for questioning the validity of the information they receive. They are ridiculed. However, the children who blindly accept the information as true and merely regurgitate the information on command when it is time to take a test, those children go on to become the decision makers in our government, law, medicine, business, and every other occupation with power and prestige. If emotions are part of a realm that we cannot experience with our five senses, then how is it that we are all aware of our emotions? What most people believe to be emotions are not truly the emotion itself. What we are experiencing is the physical manifestation of these emotions. Anger causes disturbance in the psyche, which manifests itself in the ego. These manifestations cause the heart rate to increase, body temperature to rise, and spawn many other physical traits that signify anger. Just as music from the radio is a physical manifestation of an intangible signal, our experience of emotion is the physical manifestation of an intangible signal as well. It has been shown that our emotions have a vibratory frequency to them. Furthermore, there are only two emotions that humankind experiences: fear and love. All other emotions branch either directly or indirectly from these two emotions. Fear has a long and slow frequency vibration to it, while love has a very rapid and high frequency. To show that vibration is the very foundation of existence, Hans Jenny developed what is known as cymatics in the 1940s to show that when vibrations of sound are passed through a form of media, there is a set pattern that will follow. When the frequency increases, the media develops into a more complex pattern. There are 64 possible codes of amino acids in our DNA structure made from 4 elements: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. By any means of logic, we should have all 64 codes activated within our DNA structure. Yet we presently only have 20 active codes.
And of these 64 possibilities, it appears that only 20 of these codes are turned on right now for us, the 20 amino acids. There is a switch that turns off and turns on where those coding sites lie, and that the switch for that turning off and turning on is what we call emotion. And this is the first time that we've ever seen the patterns of emotion directly physically linked to human genetic material. Well, fear is a long, slow wave of emotion. So this wave of fear is a long, slow wave and touches relatively few sites on this DNA. So an individual living in fear is limited to the number of antennae that they have available to them, whereas an individual living in the pattern of love, this is love in DNA. You can see it's a higher frequency, shorter wavelength. We have many more potential sites for coding along that genetic pattern. This information, this is amazing. This is the first time we've ever had a hard digital link between emotion and genetics.
This is important to understand because another researcher named Vladimir Popanov measured tiny particles of light called photons inside a vacuum tube. The photons were scattered as expected. A sample of DNA was then entered into the vacuum tube and they measured the photons again. They found that the particles of light aligned themselves along the axis of the DNA. Then, as they removed the DNA sample, the photons remained aligned to the same form of the DNA even though no DNA was present. This is what is known as the phantom DNA experiment. Science has now bridged a very important gap between physical and ethereal, or spiritual. Our emotions directly affect the structure of our DNA, which directly shapes the physical world we experience every day. It's difficult to understand what exactly will happen to our physical bodies, but ancient scriptures, pagan and monotheistic religions, mystery schools, and secret fraternal orders have all given indications as to what this experience will be like. The only way to prepare for what is to come is what we have sought after for our entire lives: truth. It is very important to understand that when you fear loss, fear death, fear war, fear terrorism, or fear change, you are giving others the ability to control you based on those fears. When you fight against poverty or against racism, when you fight for relationships or for freedom, you are outwardly attempting to repress that which has been placed before you to conquer inwardly. These situations are mirrors of our fears. This is why it is important to love and only love. Love those who stand with you, but especially those who stand against you. If you want to understand what your true inner fears are, analyze your ambitions and your inhibitions. Everything explained here about the esoteric agenda of the elite few at the very top is nothing to fear. They have been at work for thousands of years behind the scenes to manipulate humanity, and it has worked. Until now. To understand visually how the universe is truly a hologram, a math professor at Yale University developed a formula that is plugged into a computer program. Named after him, the Mandelbrot set shows a seemingly disorganized pattern. But no matter how far you zoom into the design, you will always find the same pattern within the whole pattern. Each fractal, broken down infinitely, will always reflect the whole. When one fractal changes its pattern, the sum total of the whole pattern changes along with it.
Ron Sakeley, Department Chairman, Chemistry, University of California, Berkeley, showed that DNA acts as an antenna for cellular upregulation. The primary function they taught us about what DNA is about. It's a receiver and transmitter of photons, light and phonon sound. For what? Cellular upregulation, meaning that their water molecules, the pyramid power around the DNA spiral energizing strands, are taking in the spiritual energy of love vibrations and then sending it out for manifesting, precipitating in a quantum field, the physical matter of the body. These are hertz, frequencies, or cycles per second that the musicians can retune their instruments to play and experiment with. Why? Again, these are the Creator's musical scale, the original solfeggio, buried for 3,000 years in the Bible. So the ancient priests who knew how to levitate the huge stones for the building of the pyramids, and the Masonic knowledge that predated ancient Egypt, the ability to have this information, these frequencies, serve the function of creation, destruction, and miracles on behalf of the empowered people who had access to this knowledge. I say that because of this metaphor. This is the difference between the power of our Creator and anything else, particularly evil. That you can go into a pitch black room full of evil, full of darkness, and light a little candle, and instantly that darkness flees. But you can't do the opposite. You can't go into a well-lit room full of truth and wisdom and righteousness and joy and health and harmony with the universal power. And you can't take any amount of darkness and go into that well-lit room and have any effect whatsoever. That is the metaphor which I frequently think of when I think that I'm not empowered. It is the greatest lesson for me, and I think for everybody else, to know that we're on the winning side and that we win in the end.
What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communism.
ODD-TV. Take a journey with me deep inside the rabbit hole. Wake up, my friends, there's some things that you have to know. Everything you ever thought you knew, it has to go. For instance, NASA is the world's largest magic show. 9/11 was a planned demolition and Sandy Hook was a scam. Come on, man, are you tripping? Constant programming being crammed in your vision. Just take a step back and examine this prison. Turn on the news and they're trying to blind you. All they ever do is tell you lies and divide you. There's nowhere you can even hide, they'll find you. Illuminati all-seeing eye right behind you. It's about time you find out we're being lied to. They're attempting to control the mind that's inside you. Hide you from the power that designed you. Does anybody have a problem with this? Well, I do. I want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They say they got it.